With Steve Cohen, the expectation is always that the New York Mets are going to spend and spend big, but how much room do they really have on the payroll to go out and make huge moves this winter?
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season, and this is the number one daily podcast of the New York Mets. Want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com, where I work as the editor-in-chief. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Down the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Now, I've had a couple listeners on our Locked On Mets Insider text line who have been asking me about the Mets payroll situation. So we're going to do a full payroll breakdown show today, where I'm going to talk about the money coming off the books, the money that the Mets might decide to add to the books, and really just give you an overarching look on what the Mets offseason plan could be financially. So let's start with the obvious. Who is not going to be a Met next season, and what does that mean for their payroll? The big money that's definitely leaving is Starling Marte. That was $20.75 million this past season. I believe the AAV on the deal was, I want to say $19 million over the past 4 years. So that is a nice chunk of change that's leaving. Now you have the two guys that you might want to bring back that we've talked about this week in Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz. That's $30.1 million for Pete this past year. It was a $30 million salary. Plus he got $100K for being an all-star. He's probably getting $100K for maybe winning a Silver Slugger, potentially being part of the all-MLB team. So he might have a couple more checks coming. Edwin Diaz, the luxury tax hit was $18.6 million in change. Jesse Winker made $7.5 million. Ryan Stanek, $4.8. Griffin Canning, $4.25. And then if you add up a bunch of different players that the Mets picked up at the deadline with Helsley and Gregory Soto and Cedric Mullins, a guy that we never saw, Nick Madrigal, you add all those types of salaries together, that's another $10 million. So you could say that $96 million is coming off of the books. So then you wonder, all right, so $96 million is off of the books. What's still there? Well, now let's run through all the payroll that the Mets are already committed to. Juan Soto, AAV of $51 million. Good luck working around the luxury tax when you have him on your books at that number, especially when you're still paying Francisco Lindor $34 million a season. His luxury tax hit due to deferred money is just under that. It's $33.8 million. Sean Manaea took deferred money, his contract, so his $25 million a year actually comes out to $22 million when it comes to the luxury tax. Brandon Nimmo, $20.25 million. Frankie Montas will pick up that $17 million player option to rehab from Tommy John. So that's on your books. Kodai Senga, it's $15 million. Clay Holmes, luxury tax hit, $12.67 million. Jeff McNeil, his luxury tax hit is less than his actual salary at $12.5 million. If you're kind of confused by that, basically what happens is to get the luxury tax salary, it's the average annual value. So for Jeff McNeil, you'll get the entirety of the deal, which was a $50 million deal. And then, of course, there's a buyout that also gets factored in. Bottom line, the average annual value of his contract when he first signed it came out to $12.5 million. So even though he's going to make $15.75 million this year, as far as what the Mets really care about, which is the luxury tax hit and how much they're going to have to pay over the luxury tax line, that's the number we look at. AJ Minter recovering off of lat surgery, and he should still be able to be a part of the Mets next season. He's going to opt into that $11 million player option, though, and that brings the grand total of all of those guys you're definitely going to pay up to $195 million, actually a little bit more than that. David Peterson's going to make the most in arbitration of the Mets ARB-eligible guys. You have Spot Track projecting him at $9.2 million. Tyrone Taylor projected at 3.6. Luis Torrens, 2.9. Francisco Alvarez hits ARB for the first time, and his projected numbers at 2.25. Huascar Brazaban and Tyler McGill each projected at $2 million apiece. Now, if you want to, you could, with McGill undergoing Tommy John, you could just unceremoniously non-tender him, but you still have a year of team control after this upcoming season in 2027. And I imagine the Mets will do the good thing and just keep him, let him rehab with the only organization that he is known. So now you're looking at 15 players altogether between the guys that are on guaranteed MLB contracts and guys that are in arbitration. They all come out to $217 million. And this is rough estimates. I'm not an accountant. I can't give you the exact numbers, but everyone's guessing a little bit because you also have Spot Track and Fangraphs that both have come to a different number of what the Mets' projected luxury tax salary is right now. I ended up at $239 million because you also have to factor in $18 million in player benefits, which is part of the CBA, $2.7 million in minor league contracts, and $1.67 million in pre-arbitration bonus pool contribution. That comes out to $22 million and change. Add that to the $217 million I had already come up with. That brings us to $239 million. Spot Track has a projection at $236.5 million. Fangraphs at $229.5 million. So whether it's 229 or 239, either way, the Mets are already pushing up against the luxury tax before they sign anybody. The luxury tax is set at $244 million for 2026. But for the Mets, the line you look at is the Steve Cohen tax line, the final tax threshold, which is $60 million over that $244 million. So that brings you to a $304 million tax line. That's the line the Mets might try to flirt with. And if they do, well, now you're basically looking at maybe it's 60, maybe it's $70 million to spend altogether. Maybe. But let's also look at where the Mets payroll has been. And if you look at the last 3 seasons, they've had some pretty hefty payrolls. $376 million was the final luxury tax hit for the awful 2023 Mets. 2024, $350 million. And then this past year, saved a little bit of money, $241.8 million when it was all said and done. So what I would say, with the New York Mets sitting somewhere in the $230 to $240 million range with their payroll without doing anything, I would not expect them to exceed $100 million in spending this offseason. I'm not talking about overall, because you can give Pete Alonso a $125 million deal over 5 years, or probably what was the projection I had the other day was 150 for 5. So yeah, that's still a possibility that contract's out there. You might give Pete 150 and Edwin Diaz 100 with a bunch of deferred money, but when you're talking about this upcoming season, that's what we're focusing on. So for the payroll in 2026, I don't think the Mets go much beyond $100 million spend. And I don't even know if they'll spend that much. So what we're going to talk about next, where do they spend that money? What parts of this roster have to be addressed, and how much will it cost to address them? We're going to go through all of that in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Rugiet Go Long. Guys, you probably heard of Viagra or Cialis, maybe even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Go Long. This is not just another ED pill. It's a total game changer for confidence. Go Long combines 2 doctor-trusted medications in one dual-action formula so you can get hard and go the distance. The effects can last up to 36 hours. That's confidence all day, all night, even into the next day. And the process is simple. You connect with a board-certified doctor 100% online, and if prescribed, your treatment ships directly right to your door. Ready to level up your confidence in the bedroom? Head to Rugiet.com. That's Rugiet.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for 15% off your first order. Again, that's Rugiet, Rugiet.com. Promo code LOCKEDONMLB. Make sure to use our code so they know that we sent you. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, help us get to our next goal of 15,000 subscribers. We're getting closer and closer. Really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so where do the New York Mets need to spend their money? For anyone that's been listening to the shows this week, I did one on Pete Alonso and one on Edwin Diaz. I really believe that is where the Mets have to focus in free agency. I think those are the two best fits for this roster, 100%. Now, granted, you could talk about the starting rotation, and we'll get to that. So maybe you might think that Dylan Cease is a better fit for this roster than Edwin Diaz because you'd rather have the ace than the closer. But the Mets need both. If they don't have Diaz, they're going to have to replace him. They do not have any reliever on their roster presently that could be the closer next season. So if it's not Diaz, you got to go out and sign somebody else. They're not going to sign Ryan Helsley. And now I'm just reiterating what I talked about in yesterday's show. Bottom line, I really think they need to get Diaz back, and I think they need to bring back Pete Alonso. Now, if you bring back those two players, it's probably going to cost you about $50 million in a luxury tax hit or for a luxury tax salary. So that could be half of your spending right there. But how much does this roster really need to be addressed? You might think, Ryan, what are you talking about? A disastrous collapse. Of course, they have to really overhaul this roster. I don't know if that's necessarily the case because of the players they have coming up in the farm system. Last year, they spent $150 million trying to address their starting rotation. That's between deals for Minaya, Montas, Clay Holmes, and Griffin Canning. Now, when it comes to the payroll for 2025 in particular, those guys amounted to about $65 million, a little bit more than that. But you still have Minaya and Holmes. You still have Kodai Senga and David Peterson. And we saw Nolan McLean is going to be a force next year. Jonah Tong might need some more seasoning in AAA. Brandon Sproat, I think he honestly could crack your opening day rotation or be some part of your team, even if it is a long man out of the bullpen because your rotation's filled. I think he is big league ready. And then you have Christian Scott coming off of Tommy John. I think it'll be good for him to start the year in Syracuse and get his feet wet and just, pitching games for a little bit. But he is an option to be part of your rotation next season. So right now, you already have 8 viable starting pitchers. Now, I agree that you need to get an ace, 100%. But really, I don't think that this is the same situation the Mets found themselves in the last couple of years where you were looking at your rotation last year before you made the additions that you did. It was Kodai Senga off of not pitching. You had David Peterson and Tyler McGill, and you had Paul Blackburn. And then, you were again, wondering how much you could expect from Senga and then how much you can maybe get from prospects. But there was a lot of questions to be answered. So the Mets bring in Minaya and Holmes, and they of course get Montas, and they sign Canning. I think if you look at what they could do with their starters, could they trade one of them? No one's taking Sean Minaya off the season he just had. I think there's a chance you could get someone to take Kodai Senga, but there's 2 years left on that deal, and he didn't look good at the end of the season, and he's been injury prone. So it might be easier said than done to find somebody who wants to take on that contract. And also, if you move him, how many starting pitchers you're going to find with the upside of Kodai Senga at $15 million in free agency? Now, you might find guys with a much higher floor, but ceiling-wise, it might be a little bit tough. And, yeah, you could trade Holmes, you could trade Peterson, but are you going to find better pitchers to replace them that are going to cost less than the $22 million that you might spend on the two of them next year? No. So I look at this rotation, and as much as it was an issue for the Mets, I would expect more from Sean Minaya. And I would expect a lot more from your prospects. And I feel really good about Holmes and Peterson, honestly, as your back end to middle of the rotation starters. If Holmes is your 3 and Peterson's your 4, maybe flip that, and Nolan McLean's your 2, you need an ace. And then Sean Minaya is a very expensive 5-starter. If Minaya is, pitching at his best, he can slide right up and knock down everybody else in the rotation. And the same thing goes for Kodai Senga. So when I look at this rotation, do I think the Mets have to go out and sign Dylan Cease and Ranger Suarez and Framber Valdez and just get all the top starting pitchers on the market? That's not realistic. I think if they do sign a starting pitcher, they better shoot towards the top of that market, whether that is, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about it, Cease, Framber Valdez, maybe it's Shane Bieber, betting on him, in his first full season off of the Tommy John. Maybe it's Zach Gallen, betting on him because he had a good second half. Or there's the trade market. But I think if you do sign an ace, you're looking at maybe $25 million. So if you sign an ace, you sign Edwin Diaz, and you sign Pete Alonso, right there, that is a lion's share of the spending you're going to have. You're not going to have a ton left over to sign 3 or 4 top-end relievers, to go out and sign more and more bats. But I think if you really look at this roster and you remove yourself from the frustration of how that season ended, and you just look forward and you look at Clay Holmes and say, well, yes, it was not the best second half, but the guy got over 165 innings pitched. And I think for qualified starters, I believe he was a top 20 starting pitcher in baseball, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but top 30 at worst. I mean, there's not many guys that over 160 plus innings are pitching to a 3.5 ERA and change. So, yeah, I think Clay Holmes can be your 3. I think David Peterson, who wore down in a year where he pitched more innings than he ever has before, we saw him in the first half when he was able to do. I think David Peterson, to expect him to be your 4 starter, you've done that in recent years, and I think he proved more this season, even with the terrible finish. And I think you can't count on Sean Manaea and Kodai Senga to make 30 starts each, but can you count on the 2 of them to combine for 25 starts that are better than the 25 starts that they got from them this past year? And it's probably a little bit more than that, but still, I think there is still that possibility, especially having the fallback of a Jonah Tong, of a Brandon Sproat, of a Christian Scott, of heck, a Jack Weninger or a Jonathan Santucci, guys that are probably going to start next season in AAA. This team needs an ace, no doubt about it. And they need to address their bullpen. They have a big question mark at first base, whether they sign Pete Alonso or sign an alternative. There are definitely needs that need to be addressed on this roster. And you might say, well, what about second base? What about center field? What about third base? What about DH? Well, I want to talk about all those things next and how it relates to the Mets spending. Because I don't think they have to spend an arm and a leg this offseason to make this a roster that's ready to compete with the best teams in the National League. I think they need to move some things around. I think they have to rework their roster. But I also don't think that this is the free agent class that you want to be spending heavily in. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more to close out the show here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. If you're trying to get to a live event, whether it's a concert, whether it's a sporting event, whatever it is, it can be tough to deal with the queues, the login screens, the surprise fees when you're trying to buy your tickets online. But Game Time takes all of that guesswork out of buying your tickets. It's fast, it's easy. It's backed by the Game Time guarantee, where you're always going to get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included when you're looking at your ticket, so there's nothing that's going to surprise you when you go to check out. The app is made super simple. You can view your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And again, you can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps. You're all set. It's honestly the fastest, cheapest, and least stressful way to get your tickets in my experience. What you got to do here is download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use that promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. Take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways and get the line graphic sent to your phone each day, so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. If you look at the Mets roster, last year, they went out and they got Juan Soto. Soto's still here. That is a big addition that holds over year, where now your lineup has a foundation of a top 3 hitter in baseball. You got your shortstop in Lindor. No questions there. Brandon Nimmo will be on this team. I doubt that they can trade him. And I don't even know if they should necessarily want to. I still think he's a solid left fielder for them. So those three spots you know. Francisco Alvarez, he's your catcher. That's another spot you know. Third base. Do the Mets have to address it? I think Brett Beatty did enough that you feel pretty good about him as your starting third baseman next season. You got Ronnie Mauricio as a fallback. Jacob Reimers in Double-A, probably a little bit too soon to expect that he can be part of your big league club next year. But you also have defensively Luis Angel Acuna that can slide over to that spot. I think Mark Vientos' days of third base are done and over with. You can make a case to go out and get a utility infielder potentially. They can play third, they can play second, they can do a lot of things. Maybe that's something the Mets consider doing. But because of what they have in-house, because they have Jet Williams, who's waiting in the wings, got up to AAA at the end of the season, he might need a little more seasoning in AAA to start the year, but he also should be afforded the opportunity to wow Mets coaches in camp and potentially break camp as the starting second baseman if things go perfectly well for him. And you still have Jeff McNeil. Like, you don't really have to address this infield. But one thing you could do to just change up the roster is find a home for Jeff McNeil. Maybe you find a new home for Mark Vientos. It's about trading some guys. Now, for McNeil, you would shed some salary. So, again, the luxury tax hit, $12.5 million. You probably have to eat some of his contract. So some of it maybe holds over. But let's just say between McNeil and Jesse Winker's salaries, you can get close to $20 million, right? 7.5 for Winker, 12.5 for McNeil. It actually does line up to exactly $20 million, right? Who do you want to spend that on? Now, we're not talking about Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso, I'm operating under the assumption right now that he's going to be back. I think if you look at the top of this free agent class, you got Kyle Tucker. That one's not happening. We've already talked about it, but the guy's going to make too much money, and he's not a center fielder. And I don't know if Juan Soto is moving into the infield or to DH just yet. I think right now we have to forecast him as the Mets starting right fielder. So Tucker, take that off the table. You got Alex Bregman, Pete Alonso, and Kyle Schwarber. I don't think you're getting two of those guys. You're probably only getting one, and that one is most likely Alonso. So where else are you spending your money in free agency? The next two guys that you look at is Bo Bichette and Cody Bellinger. Bo Bichette, not going to be the Mets shortstop. And are they going to pay him a ton of money to be their second baseman when, again, you have Jet Williams waiting in the wings? And I really do think that Jet Williams is the future starting second baseman for the New York Mets. So I don't think they're going to sign Bichette. Now, Cody Bellinger's an interesting one and somebody I want to do a full show on because he gives you a lot of defensive versatility. He can be a starting center fielder that can be a stopgap to Carson Bench. He can be your starting left fielder when you want to move Nimmo to DH, or your starting right fielder when you want to move Soto to DH, or if you want to move Soto to the infield and have him play first base. Another topic that we've been broaching throughout this offseason already that I will eventually do a show on. Yeah, he could be your starting right fielder, and you would be an exponentially better defensive team with Bellinger and right than with Soto and right. Absolutely. But if you sign Alonso, do you want to tie yourself to a core of Soto, Lindor, Alonso, Nimmo, and Bellinger for the next 5 seasons and lock that in? That, when it comes to future payroll flexibility, might not be the best course of action. So let's say Bellinger's off the table. Is Ryan O'Hearn worth spending money on? He's a first base DH type that can stand in a corner outfield spot, but he's not a good outfielder. Willie Castro, utility man, I like him. That kind of makes some sense, but he's not going to drastically change your fortunes next season. Mike Yastrzemski and Mike Tauchman are 35 years old. These are some of the better outfielders available in free agency, mind you, once you get beyond Tucker and Bellinger. Austin Hayes, coming off a decent season, but played in Great American Small Park. Max Kepler, not a great year with the Phillies. Randall Grichuk, getting old. Tommy Pham, getting old. Michael Conforto was awful with the Dodgers this year. Lane Thomas hasn't been much better. Center field options, Trent Grisham. Do you believe he's going to do what he did with the Yankees next year? I don't. Harrison Bader, doesn't seem like the Mets are going to have a reunion there. Cedric Mullins. Sorry, only way you can react to that one. Where are you spending money in free agency if it's not on Pete Alonso? Maybe it's Josh Naylor if you really are that hell-bent on getting better defensively. I think you're still downgrading your team, but that's an option. Luis Ariz, but you're trying to get better defensively. Paul Goldschmidt, old. Carlos Santana, old. Gleyber Torres, meh. And a second baseman. Jorge Polanco had a pretty good year with the Mariners, but again, a second baseman who, honestly, for them, has DH'd more than he's played second. And then you got Eugenio Suarez coming off a big year, but he's going to be 34 years old and not a great defender at third base. Yoel Moncada can never stay healthy, but maybe that's a flyer you could take. I mean, I could see him, a Yoel Moncada flyer that's not going to cost you too much. The only other name to mention is Munetaka Murakami, and I'm going to have to spend some time really doing research because I'd be lying if I said I knew a bunch about the Japanese slugger. He's 26 years old, or he will be next season because he turns 26 in February. In 69 games this year, he's hit 24 bombs. He is a real-time slugger. The question is, what is he defensively? I don't know. How much of an upgrade is that over Pete Alonso, if it is an upgrade at all? Youth-wise, sure, but some projections are saying he's going to make north of $200 million. And at that age, if a bidding frenzy starts, how many years are you giving him? So that's where I get back to, where did the Mets spend their money in free agency? And I say Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz, and then they need to be on the trade market because there's not a lot of really good free agents this year. Really, there's very few. I mean, I really think that this offseason, the challenge that's going to present itself to this front office is figuring out how you can leverage your prospects and some of your guys that are big league depth at this point and use the trade market to your advantage. How do you turn Mark Vientos into a really viable piece that helps you? Can you find a team that loves Mark Vientos that you can get a nasty setup man for Edwin Diaz that has a ton of control, an electric arm? Can you find that trade? Or can Mark Vientos be part of a trade to get you that ace starting pitcher? Is there a team that is shopping an ace, whether that is Joe Ryan with the Twins, Sandy Alcantara with the Marlins, Freddie Peralta with the Brewers? And I kind of doubt that because Vientos doesn't really fit what they look for, which is funny because that's probably why David Stearns would be looking to trade him, because he doesn't really fit his prototypical ball player being a good defensive player. Can you find the team that has an ace that wants Mark Vientos as part of the package? Can you find a team that wants Jeff McNeil to clear him out so that you have more room on your roster for some of your young infielders? So you might have room on the roster to keep Mauricio and Acuna on your big league roster, as well as potentially having Jet Williams come up. Or do you trade McNeil and you go back to the vibes guy and say, we're going to bring back Jose Iglesias for $1 million to just be our vibes bench piece? We'll see what the Mets choose to do this offseason. A lot of options are on the table, but the options in free agency are not very good. So I don't look at this team and say, man, they got to spend $120 million to field a competitive roster. I think they have to leverage what they have right now, which is a lot of really good prospects, and find the winning combination. Find the ace that you can trade for that makes sense. Find potentially, let's just say there's a Tommy Edman light out there, a guy that can play center but can also play second. Who is that trade candidate? That's what this offseason is about. It is me looking, team by team by team and trying to find different guys that are fits for the Mets and talking about it. And that's what's going to be fun about the next couple months, because there is so much to explore. But when you look at this roster, do they have to overhaul their rotation? They got 8 viable starting pitchers right now before they even get to spring training. Now, Christian Scott's coming off injury. Kodai Senga and Sean Manaea, we know the season they had. There are question marks. But there are still 8 guys on the depth chart right now that I look at and say all 8 of those guys could contribute to your big league rotation next season. So the Mets don't have to sign 3 starting pitchers. They need one awesome one. That's what they need. And then, maybe they find the next Griffin Canning for $5 million to give them more depth. But you don't need to sign 2. You don't need to trade for an ace and sign an ace. you need to get one really good pitcher. Your bullpen, you need to bring back Edwin Diaz, or if not, you got to find a way to acquire a top-end closer, which is easier said than done. And free agency, maybe it's Devin Williams, but Devin Williams is not coming off a great season. So where do you turn? You know what I mean? So I think, again, you look at where the Mets are at. It's about how can they rework this roster through the trade market and be opportunistic on signing guys that they believe in. What do you do at DH? Well, maybe your DH is Mark Vientos. Maybe your DH is Pete Alonso because you go out and get a different first baseman. The Mets are going to have to answer all these questions. They're going to have to figure out what they want to do. They want to get better defensively. They want to get better at run prevention. They need to get an ace. And they're going to have to rebuild that bullpen again. Last year, it cost them about $16 million to sign Ryan Stanek and A.J. Minter. So, and it took, again, $7.5 million to get Jesse Winker. So we went back to spending $100 million. $50 million on Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz. $25 million on an ace. $16 million to get two set of men to add to your bullpen behind Edwin Diaz. And a bat that will accent what you have on your roster because, again, you got Jet Williams as an option. I think there's a good chance that Carson Bench could break camp as your starting center fielder as well. So you have some real options. I think the Mets are in a much better spot with their roster than people give them credit for. I really do. They do still have money that they can spend because it's Steve Cohen's team. But this is not a free agent class where that's what you should be looking at, honestly. This is a year where the trade market is going to be very interesting. And so we'll see how the Mets approach it. That's going to be all for this edition of Locked On Mets. On tomorrow's show, we'll see what happens with the playoffs. If a certain team is eliminated, I might talk about it. I didn't get a chance to talk about the Yankees being eliminated today, so maybe I'll touch on that. But also it's a Friday, which means the Friday Farm Report, and so I will have some prospect breakdowns to discuss. I'm not exactly sure which way I want to take that, but we'll definitely be talking about some of the future stars on the New York Mets. We did a show last week on Jet Williams and Carson Bench, so maybe we'll talk about the young pitchers that the Mets have. A lot of fun stuff when you start looking into this farm system, so that should be a good show. I really do appreciate all of you who tuned in today. Those of you who will tune in tomorrow, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you want to be a Locked On Mets Insider, again, you can find a link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. After your second watch, check out Locked On Sports Today. Show that'll take you through all the action across sports with our local experts from each team and league-wide experts for each league. You can find Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.